Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. I just really want to thank you, Senator Bozeman, for that wonderful and warm introduction. We look forward to your application when you're done being senator. And we really thank you for your incredible support for Peace Corps over the years and for things that we care about in our nation. I mean, so many things. So thanks for your leadership here in Arkansas and in our nation's capital. And Dean Rutherford, we're just so happy to be here. The Peace Corps is happy to be here. It's my first time in Arkansas. It's been a wonderful introduction to your beautiful state, and really pleased to meet all of you here today. So thank you for having us. We're very proud of our Paul Coverdell Fellows Program that we have here with your school. It is the only one in Arkansas right now at the moment. And this is a fellows program for returned Peace Corps volunteers who want to pursue graduate work here at this wonderful institute. So very happy to be here. I am delighted to see all of you here in the audience, and I want to ask how many of you are returned Peace Corps volunteers? Any? I think you just stand up so we can really see you. Fantastic. Are there any applicants or people who are interested? Yay, wonderful. And also, I'm really so pleased to see our City Year volunteers. Thank you so much for your service to the country. Yes, very much. And I want to thank the amazing Bob G. back there, who just gave me the most phenomenal introduction to the Clinton Library. I've been to 5 now presidential libraries, and I can tell you definitely yours was the best. So if you ever get a chance, to have a tour with Bob G, it is not to be missed. So Peace Corps is 55 years old this year. And poverty, famine, disease, the threat of nuclear war, all the things that caused President Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver to start the Peace Corps so many years ago really still exist today, don't they, in this world? And the fact is that the world that we live in today is very different, though, than the world in which Peace Corps was created 55 years ago. And it's probably very different from the world that we're going to be looking at 15, 25, 35 years from now. So the topic of my conversation with you today is Peace Corps today, more than half of a century after it was created, and what we are looking at in the future to make sure that we maintain our relevance in today's world. Since the founding of Peace Corps over 50 years ago, nearly 220,000 Peace Corps volunteers have served in 140 countries around the world, working on issues ranging from empowering women and girls to training and supporting the next generation of health workers, to fighting climate change in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Our volunteers work with their communities at the last mile to reduce poverty and nurture opportunity, where in places where most aid agencies and even most host governments do not reach, in the most remote corners of our partner nations. And our volunteers don't just go the distance. They stay, living and working side by side with those they serve for 2 years. They come with specific jobs to do. They may come to be a teacher, a health worker, an environmentalist, a social entrepreneur trainer. But what they do is so much more. They drink tea with village elders. They play soccer with elementary school children. They get to know the pregnant mom next door. They build lifelong friendships with their work counterparts. Many live with host families. They learn to see the world through their community's eyes. They develop relationships of trust with their community that are incredibly essential to accomplishing their work. And today, Peace Corps' legacy continues to be exemplified in the countless incredible stories of commitment for volunteers to their communities, and stories of communities lifted, friendships forged, and lives forever changed, including the lives of Peace Corps volunteers themselves. You know this, right? So I think about volunteers like Dwayne Matthews, who was born and raised right here in Little Rock, Arkansas, on the west side of the city. Dwayne's father is a truck driver for Kaufman Lumber, and his mother is a homemaker. He's a proud graduate of Hall High School, where the state has labeled it as one of its persistently lowest achieving schools. It was a place, Dwayne says, that inspired him to want more out of life. And in time, he did just that. Dwayne went on to earn 2 degrees, a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in community and economic development from the University of Central Arkansas. The first time he heard about the Peace Corps, he was mesmerized. He knew he wanted to work in community economic development, and he longed to travel outside the United States. Where else but with Peace Corps would he have a chance to do both? It was a path he could not have predicted, in more ways than one. He was accepted and invited to serve as a community health volunteer in Malawi in central southern Africa. When he arrived there, he discovered that very few people in his rural village had ever laid eyes on an African American, outside of the hip-hop videos that were very popular there. Dwayne took their curiosity in stride. Besides assisting communities with their development priorities, one of the goals of the Peace Corps is to fostering an understanding of American culture and values. He found opportunities to tell stories of some of his heroes, Jackie Robinson, Malcolm X. He organized the screening of the film Selma when the film came out. I felt like it was my duty to share the contributions that African Americans had made here in the United States. It was a sense of pride for me, he said. And in the process, Dwayne said too, he gained a deeper understanding of his own heritage, of its complexities and its dynamics. And it inspired an unusual approach to his work at a local community hospital where he helped to improve community health awareness for youth. Dwayne realized that every time someone asked him if he was a rapper, it was an opportunity, in his words, to flip the question and turn it into a positive. Hip-hop would be his medium for connecting with youth, he decided. Dwayne called it METHOD, Malawian Empowerment Through Hip-Hop and Organizational Development. Once a week, he organized rap battles at the community hospital. Youth would come out to perform, they would break dance, they would even do graffiti art. Under Dwayne's guidance, they were working on positive messaging to the community. They talked about things like HIV/AIDS prevention, being a good partner and father, fighting diseases like malaria, and combating sexual violence. During the performances, the hospital workers would come out. They would talk about the reproductive health services that were available. They would distribute condoms, and they would offer counseling to anyone who was interested. With the help of local and NGO partners, Dwayne helped the community hospital secure funds to develop a youth-friendly services that were part of a facility that he actually constructed right next to the hospital. His work caught the attention of the U.S. Embassy, which invited Dwayne to share his leadership experience with the Young Africans Leadership Initiative, the YALI initiative, which every year brings about 500 Africans here to the United States. So he was preparing those Malawian students who are going to be visiting here in the United States. I visited Dwayne in Malawi, and I was so impressed by what I saw. His impact has been transformational in that community. He has helped to fuel a cultural shift for mostly young men, but also for young women as well. One where men are now strong advocates for women and for children. A culture where domestic abuse is no longer tolerated. A culture where questions, deeply personal questions and conversations can take place on topics like HIV/AIDS, sexual violence, and power dynamics between men and women. These conversations were not held before, and now they are. Dwayne's impact has been enormous, and it will continue to be felt by many, not only in Malawi, but also back here at home. Dwayne is now back in the United States. He's actually up in Washington, D.C. with us, and he's helping us to recruit the next generation of Americans. And he's a phenomenal representative, not only of the Peace Corps, but of Arkansas. So you can be very proud of him. He told me that he would be remiss if I came down here and I had not tried some of Arkansas's famous barbecue. He said I had to go to either Simms or Whole Hog Cafe. What do you think? Which one's better? Sims, whole hog, uh-oh. Well, I'm thinking I have to go get some for him before I leave. Anyway, to me, what Dwayne's story shows is how transformative the Peace Corps experience can be, not only for people like Dwayne, and Dwayne's life has completely changed. He thought he wanted to go into law school, and now he is really firmly focused on continuing community service, but also for his community. After 55 years of the Peace Corps, our mission remains really strong, and our methods remain really strong. The human connection is still the most important part of our work. And yet, as President Kennedy once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past are certain to miss the future. Over the past 4 years, you heard from Senator Bozeman, we have carried out the most extensive reform effort that our agency has undertaken to modernize all aspects of our operations, from competitive recruitment to transforming the way that we train and support our volunteers, to forging new innovative partnerships and harnessing new tools and technologies to help our volunteers do their work better. One of the most exciting outcomes of these reforms came a few weeks ago when we announced our record-breaking application numbers. We have received the largest number of applications that we have in 40 years, since 1975. It's very exciting. Starting last summer, we introduced these reforms to streamline our volunteer application and the recruitment process. We're now offering applicants the opportunity to choose the country where they want to serve and the job that they'd like to do. Our goal was really to break down the barriers to service for new generation Americans who are interested in not just imagining a better world, but in rolling up their sleeves and doing something about it. And I look out here at these wonderful city year members and just think you're doing fantastic work, and hope you'll consider Peace Corps service. Many of our AmeriCorps volunteers go on and serve as Peace Corps volunteers, and likewise. So we hope you'll consider Peace Corps. I'm glad to see you here today. What the numbers tell us, and what your presence here tells us, is that Americans are just as passionate as they have ever been about serving our country. And given the opportunity to reimagine their future and redefine the mark on the world, most Americans will raise their hand to serve. We are a very generous country, and I have never been more certain that the future of the Peace Corps is brighter, even in the face of the complex issues that we face as a nation right now. So what are some of the things that we see as we gaze into the future? What are some of the trends that we see? What we see is a world of increasing globalization and interdependence. I think that's probably not rocket science. But it's a world in which the security and economic prosperity of our country is even more inextricably linked with that of other nations. That includes a growing global population. Between now and 2025, more people, 8 billion people, will now call planet Earth home. And most of these new citizens will be primarily Asian and African. We will live in an increasingly youthful, increasingly multicultural world, as half the population of the poorest countries on Earth will be under the age of 20. And as migration creates even more diverse countries, including our own. Climate change will have dramatic impact and unpredictable consequences for rich and poor nations alike. But it is likely that the poor will continue to bear a disproportionate burden of those climate change-related disasters. And although the world is in many ways safer and more peaceful than it has been in the last 20 years, we must also consider the impact of destabilizing political forces, from terrorism to social unrest. The need for Peace Corps' work, helping to reduce poverty, fostering economic growth, and building relationships in some of the most vulnerable communities across our globe, matters just as much now as it did when we were founded 55 years ago. In fact, one might argue that the stakes are even higher now in 2015. But whether Peace Corps remains a vital force in years to come depends on our ability to adapt to these trends, to discern what the future holds, to innovate, to grow, and to transform, all while remaining true to our mission. From the very beginning, Peace Corps has been committed to helping our partner nations build individual and institutional capacity so that they can achieve their own development objectives. In other words, our work is driven by the development priorities of our host nations. In order to better prepare ourselves for that task in the future, Peace Corps has undertaken an extensive reform of our in-house technical training and program support in order to give volunteers the tools and skills they need to work on those projects that have proven through evidence to be most effective at achieving development impact. We have also launched strategic partnerships and embarked on really exciting collaborations such as Let Girls Learn, which I hope someone will ask me about later on. It's a whole of government approach to addressing the issue of girls' education, trying to keep girls in school and keeping them there, to strengthen our volunteers' capacity to respond to community needs. We want our volunteers to be prepared to make real impact by nurturing leadership in their communities. I want to tell you about a story of a volunteer, I think, who illustrates that perfectly. His name is Ian Hennessy. He served in the Kédougou region of Senegal, which is the southeastern part of Senegal. Anyone serve as a volunteer in Senegal here? No. Nope, okay. Anyway, the Kédougou region is in the very southeastern part. It's over near Mali, and it's the place in Senegal that has the highest malaria incidence rates. Ian worked very closely with his best friend and fellow community health worker, Sheikh. They were very close. They played soccer on their free time. They ate evening meals together most nights, and their favorite activity was playing with Sheikh's little 4-year-old niece. Her name was Soxnia, and she was the apple of their eye. In Senegal, the government had developed an effective national malaria control program, which included the distribution of insecticide-treated bed nets. But the program never really seemed to reach the people who most needed them, people in the most distant, most remote communities where malaria was the highest. And when development workers did reach their community, there was often a lot of doubt and mistrust. But Ian was beloved in his community because he was one of them. Their world was rocked one day when Soxnia came down with a fever, and then 3 days later, she died of cerebral malaria. They were devastated. In their despair, they realized that business as usual in malaria prevention was not enough to combat malaria in their part of the world. We work in big generalities, fight malaria, improve maternal and child health, Ian wrote in his blog, but it boils down to specifics like preventing this tragic and unavoidable death. Now, the standard approach for treating malaria in most parts of the world is that community health workers are attached to a clinic and they sit there until a sick person arrives, and then they diagnose them and they provide treatment. So Sheikh and Ian, in response to this tragic death, put their heads together with the other community health workers, and they came up with a new idea, a much more proactive idea. They proposed to go out once a week to every single home in their community and to ask people if they had signs and symptoms of malaria. Did they have nausea, fever, achiness? And if they did, they tested them with rapid diagnostic test kits that were available then, and they treated them on the spot. That was their proposal. And if someone had severe malaria, they would accompany that person to the hospital. They took this idea to the National Malaria Control Program because it was different from the community-based protocol, and they needed to get permission first. And to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, that was part of the U.S. government's President's Malaria Initiative that was there evaluating the impact of Senegal's National Malaria Control Program. And they were intrigued by this idea. It seems very time-intensive, they said, but let's give it a go. We'll do a case control study. We'll try your intervention in your little village, and we'll find another village that's 30 miles away that has the same bed net coverage rate and the same malaria incidence rate, and we'll see if your intervention makes a difference. After the rainy season ended, and they had been trying this intervention for about 4 months, what they found was astounding. A 90% decrease in malaria incidence as compared to that other village. 90% decrease. No deaths that year in Sheikh and Ian's village. First time they could ever remember that happening. Most importantly, it empowered the local community health workers, those who knew the region and knew their communities best, to take immediate action and directly save lives. The CDC and the National Malaria Control Program were intrigued by this result. They were concerned that it couldn't be scaled up because it was very time intensive, but they said, let's try it at a larger scale. So they tried it with 15 villages, again, doing a case control study. They had the same result after one rainy season. They tried it with 100 villages. Same result, 90% decrease in malaria incidence. Each time, Sheikh, Ian, and their little community health team trained all of the community health workers in those villages. So they became trainers of trainers. Last year, just this past August and September, they just completed a huge population-wide 1.45 million people survey of this now called proactive case detection and treatment approach, Sheikh and Ian's approach. Same result. This time it was an 88% decrease in malaria incidence, but it has changed the face of malaria prevention worldwide. It's now the official community-based detection and treatment program, the official approach in Senegal for community-based treatment of malaria. WHO is revising their guidelines, making it best practice for community-based malaria prevention and treatment. And the results of that trial are now, this past month, or I guess it was 2 months ago, published in the International Journal of Tropical Medicine and International Health. Born out of grief, what began as Sheikh and Ian's passionate commitment to saving lives in their little corner of the world has now become an international movement. And now the Peace Corps has almost 3,000 Peace Corps volunteers in 24 countries in Africa who are scaling up Sheikh and Ian's approach, along with tens of thousands of community health workers in those 24 countries. It has changed the face of malaria prevention and treatment. Now that is a pretty dramatic result for Peace Corps experience. Those of you who served in Peace Corps know that most of our results are not really like that. But what's important about it, I think, is that it illustrates what is really essential to the Peace Corps experience, that of a volunteer who serves as a catalyst in a community to help members of the community identify a problem that is most important to them, and to nurture them and to give them opportunity, perhaps connect them with resources that will help them to be able to improve the effectiveness of their program, or at least evaluate the effectiveness of the program and make a difference in the community. That's what all volunteers do. So we're very proud of him. And we continue to learn from innovative volunteers like Ian and community members like Sheikh. Another trend that we're seeing as we sort of scan the horizon is that our host nations are getting more and more developed themselves. They now have universities and they have graduates, and they are now asking for Peace Corps volunteers that have more experience. And so as a result, we have started some new programs. One you heard from Senator Bozeman was our Global Health Service Partnership. This is our program for doctors and nurses. It's a brand new program. We've been doing it about 3 years now. It's one we do with another NGO called Seed Global Health. And we send doctors and nurses to Africa, 3 countries now, but scaling up to 5 next year. They work in medical schools and nursing schools to build health system capacity. We're very excited. We have doctors serving as Peace Corps volunteers. It's probably the best value to government that we have right now. We're going to continue to build on this innovative public-private partnership model to scale up other programs for highly skilled Americans. I am particularly excited about the possibility of having a tech corps, but we're thinking about an environmental corps and other kinds of corps of highly skilled people who can meet some of the most pressing needs in our developing world. Peace Corps' unique impact also comes from our commitment to promoting a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served, as well as better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. Now, promoting better understanding may seem awfully simplistic, maybe even naive when you consider all the problems we have in our world. But if you have any experience leading an organization, and I know some of you do, you know that trying to organize groups with diverse perspectives, trying to ignite change, trying to mobilize communities around something that's really important, it can be very difficult, isn't it? Cultivating understanding and bridging divide is hard work. And what 55 years of partnership and development has showed us at the Peace Corps is that trust and personal relationships and meaningful collaboration are utterly essential to addressing and especially sustaining the most difficult challenges of our time. Relationships of trust and meaningful collaboration are not only the hallmark of compassionate service, but also essential to Peace Corps' future. I think about the migration crisis, continued unrest in the Middle East, and how rapidly these forces are shaping the future of young people growing up in those regions, as well as the future of young people growing up here in the States. Time and again, history has shown us that the greatest tragedy in our world is not poverty, but lack of dignity, opportunity, and hope. And that's why Peace Corps nurtures the leaders of tomorrow in the communities that we serve. Because we don't just work with the urban, the elite, the wealthy, those who have access to resources already. Rather, Peace Corps volunteers reach out to the rural, the undiscovered, those with potential, those who with just a little boost could make a huge difference in their communities and indeed their nations and our world. If the United States wants to make friends in an increasingly diverse, interconnected world, we need strong personal relationships with host country leaders of all ages, from the community level up to the national level, who share our values, have positive perceptions of the United States, and who are interested in collaborating with us as a nation and as a greater global community. And Peace Corps volunteers are so good at that because we tend to work with young people, and then they grow up. And I cannot tell you how many presidents, government ministers, legislators, captains of industry, pastors and ministers, NGO leaders that I've met around the world who've told me that they got their start from the Peace Corps volunteers. Right now in Africa alone, there are 12 presidents who say that they got their start from a Peace Corps volunteer. So I want to close today with the story of one such leader. A few years ago, I had the chance to travel to Sierra Leone to lead a delegation for the second term inauguration of Ernest Bai Koroma, president of Sierra Leone. And after the ceremony, they had a state dinner, and I was invited to sit right next to him at the head table. So we were sort of making chit-chat, and I had read his bio, and I said to him, so, how does a young man from McKinney, that was where he was born, grow up to be president of his nation? And he said to me, you know what, there's a Peace Corps volunteer in that story. And I said, really, tell me. He said, yeah, when I was a young boy, maybe 9, 10, 11 years old, there was a volunteer named Sharon. And she came to our village, and she was a teacher, but after school, she had a program for the kids, the younger kids. And she offered us homework help, and she really encouraged us to do well in school. But what I really remember about her was how she taught us about the importance of serving others. She was the first person I can ever remember who told me about the importance of serving a cause greater than yourself. She was the one who helped us see opportunities for helping others. And so with Sharon, we used to do things like we'd clean up the park, or we'd help, the little old ladies in our neighborhood go shopping in the market. We'd carry their bags. Or we used to go to the school and help the carpenter who, he seems like he was ancient, but we'd help him repair the desks and the tables after the kids broke them. She taught us that every day we could find an opportunity to help others. And the lessons I learned from her and the values that she lived, I have remembered nearly every day of my life. They took me through high school and then college as I graduated from university. I became a business leader, one of the largest business owners in my nation, and then I became president. And I have thought about Sharon all along the way. And I said, wow, that is just a beautiful story. Have you shared that with her? And he said, are you kidding? I was 11. I didn't have the words for that at age 11. So I said, and I can't imagine what I was thinking, honestly. I was actually, what was going through my brain is I will never see this man again in my life. So I said to him, well, if you ever come to Washington, D.C., let me know and I'll hook you up with Sharon. Wouldn't you know, 1 week later, he phoned me and he said, guess what? President Obama just invited me to Washington and I can't wait to meet Sharon. So we have terrible records of the early days of Peace Corps. He couldn't even tell me what year it was. And he didn't know her last name, nothing. So I called down to our office and I sort of explained the situation. They said, no way. There's absolutely no way we're ever going to find this woman. But then 2 hours later, they called and they said, we actually found someone named Sharon Alvarado, and she was from McKinney. And I said, yes. And they even had a phone number for her. So I called her up and I explained the situation. And she said, oh no, I am confident that none of my kids ever became president. And then she said, and I really don't recognize that name at all. So I said, okay, but Sharon, I need you. I'm desperate. I promised him a Sharon. I said, I'll tell you what. You don't have to pretend to be that Sharon. You could just represent all Sharons. Or at least all volunteers from Sierra Leone. And she was really hesitant, but she finally agreed because I really put the pressure on her. Now I want to just stop for a moment and tell you about Sharon. She was an amazing woman. After she completed her Peace Corps service, and she served in Sierra Leone from 64 to 66. Anyone who served in Sierra Leone here? Anyone know Sharon? Anyway, she went back and she taught school in Chicago, and she taught in some of the roughest neighborhoods of in our country. She taught in the first high school that had a metal detector. And she had a rough time. She was assaulted several times, but her students loved her, and she was incredibly dedicated. And she won a lot of awards, teaching awards from the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. She was an amazing teacher, and she was so dedicated to her students. But she had just retired, and she was now in like Boca Raton, and didn't want to come to Washington. So anyway, I did persuade her, and she arrived on the day. And my original vision of this whole event was that I would have this huge, public event with all of my staff, and at that time we had about 600 people. And President Koroma would speak, and she would speak, and it would be a wonderful reunion. And she said, no way, I'm not doing that. But I will meet him in your office. So I said, okay. So she showed up on the day, and she was carrying a massive photo album, one of those old ones with the like gold cords and the little black things with the black and white photos, the corner pictures. So she was holding her photo album like this, like a shield, and it was massive. And she came in my room, and it was clear that she was intensely uncomfortable. So I was trying to kind of put her, at ease and what have you, and she was very early. But then finally, President Koroma arrived. Now he's about 6'2", very regal, looks like a president. And so he marches in his really good French suit, and he's followed by his 5-star general who's literally half his size. And there's all sorts of medals flapping in the breeze, and he's carrying his briefcase. And this guy has to literally run behind him because the president's legs are so long that this guy has to scurry behind him. So that's sort of the scene. The president strides in, and this guy's following behind him. And he spots Sharon. Now, meanwhile, Sharon had moved to the farthest corner of my office. She was really trying to get away. Anyway, so the president walks in, he spots her on the other side of the office, he crosses the office in 5 strides, and he throws his arms around her. Sharon! And I was behind him and behind her, and I could see her eyes, and they were like this. And she still had the photograph album between them. And so then he said one word that changed everything. Actually, it was 2 words. He said, Touré Street. Touré Street. Touré Street was the name of the street where she lived, and she was the Sharon. She was the Sharon. And they sat down on my couch, and she pulled open her photograph album, and there were pictures of him as an 11-year-old boy that he had never before seen, because no one had a camera in those days. Now, Sharon as I said, was very humble and incredibly honest. I'm confident that if I had been in this position, I would have said to him, "Of course I remember who you are." But she's like, "I don't remember you. Can you please tell me which one you are?" And she pointed to the photo. That's me right there. She's like, "You're Baba?" So Baba was his nickname. That's why she didn't remember him, because he had a nickname. She said, "Oh my gosh, you're naughty. I can't believe you grew up to be president." She said to me, "This guy," she said, "he never listened to a thing I said. I can't believe he remembered all these things. He was never paying attention." But anyway, they went through each of those photos, and he was weeping tears for 20 minutes. As he was looking at each of these photos, there were pictures of his grandfather, who had died 30 years ago, his best friend, his mother. Now, his mother, it turns out, was so important in Sharon's service, because it was his mother who, it turns out, was her landlord. That's why he remembered her so much, because Sharon lived in her mother's house, in his mother's house. So Sharon was able to tell him how important his mother was in her life, how his mother had taught her how to cook Sierra Leonean food, how she had taught Sharon how to wrap her headdress, how she had taught her how to shop in the market. She had taught Sharon which boys to definitely not hang around with because they drank too much, which boys she could hang around with because they went to church. She introduced life in McKinney to Sharon, and she was so important to Sharon. So she was able to tell the president how important his mother had been in her life. And it turned out that his mother had just passed away 2 weeks earlier, and so he was still deeply grieving his mother. And to know that his mother had had such a profound effect on Sharon's life was a source of great pride to him. And then he went down and he addressed my whole staff, and he gave the most beautiful speech about the impact of Sharon in his life, but even more importantly, perhaps, the impact of our Peace Corps volunteers in the lives of his people. He talked about how, by our presence in their communities, our volunteers had demonstrated that the people of the United States care about the people of Sierra Leone, that by living and working among his people, we showed that we wanted to learn their language and learn about their culture, even though some of their languages were never written down, that we cared about learning those forgotten languages, that we wanted to work on their priorities, not our priorities, that we worked side by side with them, like brother and sister. He said, "That is worth so much to my people. Thank you so much." And then, amazingly enough, at the end of it, she stood up and gave a 10-minute speech about his mother. So at the end of the whole day, we all went out, and the Secret Service men were there because he's a president, and they were talking to their cufflinks. And we were standing there at the sidewalk, and he turned to her and he said, "This is one of the most special days of my life, and I will never forget it." And then he got into the car and drove away. Now, I hear the story, I mean, not exactly quite so dramatically, but I hear it quite a lot in the places that I visit. It's not usually presidents, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a mayor or a midwife or a mom. But I can tell you, even if 50 years have passed since that person last saw their Peace Corps volunteer, they remember everything about you. And I like to tell this story to return Peace Corps volunteers because if you're like me, we wondered if we made a difference. We often think that we didn't make a difference, but I can tell you that you did. That the love and support and encouragement that you gave to your community was probably greater than any single act that you did, probably more important than the well that you dug or the class that you taught. But just by being there, by your presence, by the love that you showed to those people, it has changed their lives just as much as it has changed yours. And I also imagine that most of you feel that you got more than you gave. Am I right? And that is the synergy of Peace Corps. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's the best example of synergy that I know. People sometimes ask me why I'm so passionate. I'm clearly very passionate about Peace Corps. And why I think that one person can make a difference. When there's so many problems out there, why is it that one person can make it? Why do I think that one person can make a difference? And I love the analogy, this analogy. You know, sometimes one little act of kindness seems like a drop in the bucket, no bigger than a single raindrop. But raindrops fall into rivers, rivers swell into the seas, and the rise and the fall of a tide can literally transform a continent. And that is the impact of our work. No matter what the future holds for any of us, I hope that all of us continue to serve our community. It is the greatest thing we can do as Americans who have so much. Now I'm going to quote President Clinton. This is the quote that I just found over there in the library. I'm making a little adaptation. He says, every penny we spend, and I'm saying, and in my words, every moment we spend, on reducing worldwide poverty, improving literacy, wiping out disease, will come back to us and to our children 100-fold. Isn't that the truth? So I leave you with that. Thank you so very much.
We have time for some questions. If anyone has a question for the director, please raise your hand. Yes, we have one back here. Yes, Stacy.
Hi, thank you for being here today.
Sure.
I'm so happy that I got to catch the last bit. My name is Stacy Cox, and I am a first-year student here at the Clinton School. I'm also one of the Return Peace Corps volunteers
are you a
that
fellow?
Here. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I scurried over here after
Where
a class
were you?
assignment. I was in Zambia from 05 to 07.
Oh, how wonderful.
My question is, as now the director, but also as a Return Peace Corps volunteer, what is your advice for Return Peace Corps volunteers to continue to meet the third goal of Peace Corps, which is to share our knowledge of our host country with Americans when we're 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, 20 years out from our service? Just some of your advice for how we can continue to share.
You know, there are so many ways, honestly. Part of it I really think is a mindset of just sharing. I mean, if you live your life in a way of service, then I think that in and of itself is the most powerful testimony you can have. I mean, some of the most amazing people that I know, I didn't even know they were Return Peace Corps volunteers until, you know, I observed their work and they were living out a life of service, and then I later found out that they were Peace Corps volunteers. I thought, well, there you go. But there are other ways you can do it. I mean, one obvious one is by joining, you know, an RPCV group. Now, I know there's an RPCV group here in Arkansas. Are there members here? Yes, so many members. Okay, you're already members. So that is a great thing, just because collectively you can do some wonderful things. I think social media offers a lot of opportunity, and a lot of Return Peace Corps volunteers have blogs. You can continue to serve through Peace Corps. I mean, we have Peace Corps Response. You're probably familiar with that, which is shorter-term programs, 3 months to a year. We have, there's no end to what you can do with that. We have one guy who's been serving the Peace Corps since 1985. So you could just make Peace Corps service a lifelong goal. But I really think more than anything, it's creating an attitude where you look for opportunities to serve others. That is actually the most important thing I think any of us can do, because I really honestly believe that service is more of a mindset than anything else. It's not as much an action as it is just a way of living your life. And I bet you already have that. I bet you're already an excellent third goaler. And we love it if you talk about Peace Corps. You know, we really love that. I mean, if you take the opportunity when you meet, especially young people, but even other older people who want an encore career. My own grandparents joined Peace Corps when they were 70. So if people, you meet people who you think are at a crossroads and would benefit from Peace Corps service and they seem to be interested, talk to them about your experience and encourage them to look into it. That's also a great way to do it. Some ideas, right?
Any other questions? Yes, right back here.
Hi, my name is
Hi.
My name is Kitty Chisholm. I'm a retired journalist,
Oh, wonderful.
which is what brought me to Arkansas. And I've always thought of my career really as being a form of public service. I'm not really sure the rest of the world
Yeah,
thinks
it
of
is.
But I really
believe it.
And as a former newspaper owner, I can tell you that it was public service. It was not
Yeah.
profit.
Yeah.
But I always imagined that about this point in my life, I would really like to join the Peace Corps, and I understand that age is really not a barrier.
No, our oldest volunteer is 86, by the way. So
Okay.
you got a long time.
Okay, and now that I'm also widowed, I'm probably freer to do that than ever. But I also happen to have been the mentor for a young woman who went to the Philippines who was brutally murdered.
Oh, Julia.
Yeah, Julia was she was my protege, actually. And so I'm a little was taken aback by that, and I just wonder whether you could explain what you introduced a little bit at the beginning of your speech. What are you doing that would allay that fear for me now?
Sure. Thank you for that, and thank you for mentoring Julia. Now, I did not know Julia because I wasn't at the Peace Corps at that time, but I know Linda, her mother. And that must have been such a painful, wonderful family. Did you live in Alexandria?
We were all Navy.
Oh, you were all Navy together,
Yes,
okay.
But I mentored her in Northern Virginia, where
Okay.
I came from here.
We have spent a lot of time and a lot of money also in revamping the way we support and train our volunteers and also respond when bad things happen. We have especially done a lot of work around sexual assault, but really all forms of safety and security as well. Now, before 2003, oddly enough, Peace Corps did not even have a formal safety and security program. When I was a volunteer in 1981, there were no safety and security officers at all. Our basic model of safety and security is integration into the community, and it remains the most important aspect of our work. And it is proven to be true over 55 years because our communities so love our volunteers that they protect them so amazingly well. Our research shows that about 95% of the crimes against volunteers occur out of volunteer sites. So they almost never happen in the places where volunteers live and work. And that was the case for Julia too. She was alone in a national park or near a park. She was going hiking. So now we have a pretty robust safety and security program where we have full-time staff, and in fact, all staff are trained to be safety and security officers. I mean, that is part of their job. And we have now a lot of regulations about places where volunteers live. We work very closely with local military and police force, as well as host families and communities. When communities accept the responsibility to take a volunteer, they have to go through a program where we train them on what it means to support a volunteer, including their safety and security. But probably the most important thing we do, apart from making sure that they get a good community and a wonderful host family and a great job, is to train our volunteers about what they can do to reduce risks, because they are actually the most important factor. If we train them to just identify risk situations, safety and security training. Anyone here is there anyone who just recently completed service? There is a lot of safety and security training, isn't there? Yeah. And a lot of it is focused on giving volunteers the tools to be able to assess situations that are dangerous. We also have an approach that is common in universities called bystander intervention, where we train volunteers to watch out for each other. So it's sort of like never let, if you go together someplace, you leave together. You never leave someone behind. Basically, that's the idea. And the other part of bystander intervention is that you sort of make a compact with your peers that you will accept intervention. So that's the idea. We're continuing to build on best practice, and especially in the area of sexual assault, we are guided in that effort by a sexual assault advisory council that is comprised of 16 members of really our nation's leading experts in the field of sexual assault risk reduction and response that have helped us to have a program that is really robust. Now, that said, the world is a risky place, and there are different kinds of risks in the places where we work. So that's why we spend so much time talking to volunteers about what they need to do to be able to identify risky situations. The things that harm young people here are different from the things that harm people in other places. But we try as hard as we can to prepare volunteers, and then when something bad happens, that we have staff who are trained to respond immediately. And we have phenomenal staff, and they do respond quickly.
Do you take that into account where you send older volunteers?
Absolutely. Well, we take it into account where we send all volunteers. We never place a volunteer in a place that we think is not safe. We use data. Now there's a lot of data out there. So we have crime rates for every single place in the world where we have volunteers. And let me just give you an example that is very current, and that is El Salvador and Guatemala. Those are both countries that are fairly dangerous, but we do a lot of work with our embassy, the regional security officer at the embassy, with the security team, the national security teams, with the police forces and what have you. And we have crime rates for every single community in both those countries. And we have put volunteers, we continue to stay there. We have never left El Salvador. Even during those terrible wars in the 1980s, we have never left El Salvador because we have a strong commitment to that country. But we place our volunteers in those districts where the crime rates are the lowest. We had, about 4 years ago, we were noticing a pattern where there was a high rate of crime against volunteers. Now, it's mostly petty theft, someone's cell phone is stolen or something like that. But we were seeing high numbers, and so we completely changed our footprint in both of those countries. And we changed some other aspects of our program too. In those countries, what we found is that when we analyzed the data is that volunteers were being exposed to robbery on buses. So now our volunteers, we run a bus line, which is very un-Peace Corps-like. Mostly part of our model is that people ride public transport. But we run a bus between the various sites for the volunteers so they won't be exposed to crime in those areas. The one thing that I would say that relates to what we call 50-plussers is that, well, and all volunteers really, is that there are some countries that have pretty evolved health systems, South Africa, Thailand, and Morocco, where we can place volunteers from a medical perspective where the medical care that is available to them is really very high. It's similar to the United States. In some cases, I think even better than the United States, to be honest with you. So we place, like if you go to South Africa, there'll be a higher proportion of older volunteers than there will be in Malawi, let's say. So we do very much take people's medical conditions into consideration. We also have on our website, and we reinforce it when someone receives an invitation letter, the crime profile of the countries where they serve, because we really want people to make informed decisions when they accept an invitation. So now when you get your invitation inviting you to a particular country program, it has all the crime information there, and you can decide for yourself if you want to participate. But I would also encourage you to look at the crime rates here in our own country, because they're in many, many places. The truth of the matter is we look at our statistics, actually your risk of certain crimes is lower in Peace Corps than is just living in Washington, D.C., or even maybe in Arkansas, I don't know. But we work very hard. There's nothing we spend more time on than safety and security and health.
I know there are more questions, and I encourage you to please come up and visit personally with her. But ladies and gentlemen, let's really thank the Director of the United States Peace Corps here.